Hi there, this is Julia from Grad Skills Pro, and today we're going to talk about the 5 stages of grad school, the incorrect assumptions that cost you, and how the reality really looks like. And so I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm making this video in the first place. So I really want to show how the reality of grad school looks like for many people so that you can adjust your expectations and really have a much less stressful PhD experience so that you know what to expect and you can take charge of your experience to get the most out of it and actually create a path that you enjoy while also being very successful. What I decided to do for this video is to make this into 5 stages of graduate school, similar to the Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And so this is a little bit of a funny twist to it, even though this is not a very funny topic. But what I also realized is some of those stages are actually very similar to the 5 stages of grief. And that's basically why I decided to do this. I'm also actually not the only one who thought about that either. After I created this, I realized that on Instagram, someone else out there actually had a very similar idea as well. So to tell you what are the 5 stages of grief, just to give you a very broad introduction, the 5 stages of grief is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And to keep it with the same first letters, I decided to call the 5 stages of graduate school delight, activity, burnout, depression, and acceptance, or spite. And so we're going to go into each of those, and I'm going to tell you why I think these stages exist, what that means for you, and how you can adjust your expectations or how you can shape your experience in graduate school to make it more productive and less stressful for you. So let's talk about the first year in graduate school, phase one, which would be delight, right? Yes, you went through the application period, you had on-campus interviews, and finally you got the acceptance letter into one of the graduate schools that you wanted to get into. Yay, you got in. So you worked very hard, you're very excited about it. And once you start, your excitement will fade slowly over time. But still in this first phase, the reality is, as a comparison, as if you're standing in front of Mount Everest wearing a pair of flip-flops. And I'm saying this in a slightly funny way, simply because there's so much you don't know, and you don't know how much you actually don't know. And so you remember the several stages of like knowledge, right? And I'm sure you've heard about this before. You know what you know what you don't know, and the last one is you don't know what you don't know. And that's really the most difficult part because you don't know what to expect. And so in this particular stage in graduate school, you are very excited and you really have no idea how much you don't know. You don't know how long things take for you to do. And your expectations are really most of the time completely blown out of proportion. And this might look like, oh, you started graduate school in cancer biology and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to cure cancer. And the problem with this approach is really not knowing what you don't know. And in this first year, in this first phase, you're starting to do some research, but you're very busy with classes. Most likely you will have to be a teaching assistant. You have to find a research project, or you slowly start a research project, which is associated with a lot of reading. Maybe you'll start doing some experiments. But so you're going to be very busy, and this will take some time for you to dig into the literature and to figure out what you don't know. And then after this initial phase, let's say the second year in graduate school, right? So let's call this activity. And this will also be associated with imposter syndrome, as you will see in a little bit. So in this phase, second year of graduate school, you still have classes, you might have to TA, or you might still be a teaching assistant. And from the students, you might actually get very hard questions where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know the answers to these questions. And while maybe earlier on you thought, okay, if you're teaching something, if you're the teacher or later on professor, you will have to know the answers for everything. And that's simply not true. If you're a TA, you might get the hard questions. If you're doing research, you still have lots and lots of reading to do. You might start to learn experimental techniques, and you might realize it's actually a lot harder than you thought it would be. So you dive into your work, you're pretty busy, and you slowly but surely start to realize how much you actually don't know. And this really leads to imposter syndrome because you compare yourself to others and you feel like you're at the wrong place, right? So your peers might actually start publishing their first papers, and you are like, oh my gosh, I'm not even close to that, which also again leads to imposter syndrome. And this is not going to be a video fully about imposter syndrome. I'm going to make a video about that later on. But I want to mention here that you have to realize that everyone's PhD journey is different, and you cannot compare your own journey to the journey of your peers. And if you made it this far, you are at the right place. You just need to figure out how to deal with it, honestly. I'm sorry to say that. So before we get into the next stage, if you like this type of content and want to get notified when the next video comes out, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below. And also let me know in the comments, what do you struggle with most during your PhD? Or if you're not in the PhD program right now, what do you struggle with most in academia? And this is for me to get a sense of what people's struggles are, what you need help with, so I can create videos around those topics. So now you've gone through the second stage or the second year in graduate school, and I'm seeing this as like the experience that I've had in the US. So this is why like a PhD takes somewhere between 4 to 6 years or something like that. And so this is why I'm like taking those stages. And in the third year of graduate school, I call this the year of burnout, which happens very often. So in this year, you're most likely done with classes. Maybe you still have to be a teaching assistant, and you realize you're in the middle of your PhD and you're just starting to understand the scope of your research project. You might have a better idea of the literature, all the things that you don't know, or many of the things that you don't know. You start doing experiments, but those experiments keep failing. You still keep reading, and there's still a lot of papers that you still need to read, and it takes you a long time to read a paper because you don't have that much experience in it yet. And so really gaining this experience takes a lot of time, and this is where you're at right now. There's a lot of things that don't work out. Things just get piled onto your desk and you're like, oh my gosh, how do you even see the light? So what you do is you work harder. Maybe you start to write things up into a paper and you realize this actually takes 10 times longer than I thought it would. Going through the paper iterations with your advisor might take 10 times longer than you anticipated. Maybe you don't have the right support that you actually need. You realize that your friends are all in the same lab or in similar or related labs. You get very little sleep. You basically live in the lab if you're doing experiments, right? And you might realize, okay, this is your life right now as a PhD student, and you work incredibly hard. You're not getting a ton of results or a ton of results that you expected to get. And so, which can ultimately really easily lead to burnout. And so to get through this stage, if you're in this stage right now, this is really about goal setting and being kind to yourself. You need to figure out what can you realistically do? How much sleep do you need? Have a friend circle, because social support is incredibly important during this stage. And then if you're not quite at this stage yet, to really prevent this is to realize that the assumptions that you have at the beginning of graduate school are most likely incorrect, which is exactly why I'm making this video over here. Okay, so you've gone through the burnout stage, you started to maybe get a little bit more balance, even though your experiments still don't work out, you still have a ton of stuff to do, and now you're in the fourth year in grad school, maybe the fifth year, depending on your progression and where you are. And that stage is most likely depression. Yay, we went from burnout to depression, how fun is that? And this is the stage where friends or family might ask you, when are you going to finish school? Or when are you going to get your PhD? Or when are you going to get a real job? And you start to realize the time moves so fast. First of all, you still have no idea what you want to do after your PhD. And then secondly, you still keep working your butt off, but you're not getting anywhere, or what seems like you're not getting anywhere. And really what you need during this stage is you need support from your friends, your family, a mentor or 2 or 5, you know what I'm saying? So you really need the support to get through this. You also have hopefully started to gain some experience in soft skills like time management, goal setting, and you definitely need to adjust your expectations. And so during this stage, just probably together with the burnout stage, the most difficult stage in your PhD, really adjusting your expectation and asking yourself, what are the minimum requirements right now to get you through this? Really can reframe your mind a little bit in terms of you can do this. And also not necessarily thinking about, oh, I have another year or 2 years, or I don't know how long, I need to go through this. But take it day by day, take it one step at a time, and you will get through this. It's a matter of time, even though you don't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. And after this stage, which is the 5th year or 6th year in graduate school, is either the acceptance stage, you've gone through it, or spite. And I'm gonna talk about both of those. And so you realize that you're in this stage most likely a few months before you start writing your thesis. You still have no idea how this will all come together. You still have no idea of your exact timeline, most likely. You're just like, okay, I need to defend my thesis at some point. It is going to happen somehow, but I have no idea how. You might have a vague idea of what your goals are after your PhD. So you might look into postdoc positions or industry jobs or just in general job applications, right? But another thing that you might realize is that in your research, like maybe slowly your experiments start to work out. Your papers are slowly getting accepted. Your committee actually trusts you to be able to write this all up into a thesis, right? And so this is the stage where you realize, okay, this is coming together at some point. This is slowly coming together by pure magic or the universe or however you want to call this, even though maybe you didn't finish everything you wanted to do, and that's okay, but you got some decent papers out. You have an idea when your graduation will be, and everything will be okay. And this is really the acceptance stage. Now, there's also another scenario, and this is where maybe throughout graduate school, maybe your advisor was not quite as good as you expected them to be. Maybe you didn't get the right support that you needed. And this is where this can really turn into spite, right? You've gone through it. You can't wait until the whole thing is done. You definitely don't want to stay in academia. You might want to quit science altogether because it was such a terrible experience. And unfortunately, this does happen, but it's really a shame because it really depends all on the expectations that you have going through that process and whether you are actually working in a supportive environment or not. But it also depends on how you create this experience for yourself, that you're seeking out the support that you need, that you find the help that you need, that you work on your soft skills like goal setting and time management and scientific communication and all of these things, right? So it really, it depends on several different factors, and you are in charge of this. So make this the best that it can be. And in conclusion, it's really all about expectations and learning the right skills, such as goal setting and time management and scientific communication, really to handle the demands on you and the demands on your time. And also, the more you know yourself, the more you know about how you learn, how you work best, what are the best times of the day where you feel most productive in particular areas in your work, right? Is it easy for you to read papers in the morning versus late at night? I don't know. Everyone's different, right? And so really knowing yourself is really key in getting the most out of this experience for yourself and making sure that you are as successful as you can be while staying happy and not like losing your mind in the whole process. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy this one over here where I'm going to talk about how to find balance in graduate school. And that's it, and see you in the next video.